Hey guys, in today's video you will learn the real story of Callan Huxley, a man who died for 20 minutes and came back with a shocking revelation. Jesus is not what we were taught. What he saw in the afterlife will shake everything you believe about God, life, and the purpose of existence. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, and comment here from which city you are watching. Now get ready because this story will give you goosebumps from beginning to end. My name is Callan Huxley, and looking back, I vividly remember the days when life went about its peaceful routine in Bellingham, Washington. I was a supervisor in a children's and youth court where I daily helped young people who were lost on tortuous paths. My existence was marked by a sense of duty and a faith that, although followed rigorously, had never caused me any major questions. My wife, Marla, has always been my rock. I remember long afternoons when we walked hand in hand through the city's tree-lined streets talking about everyday life, without sensing that something extraordinary was about to change everything. Sunday church, moments of prayer, and simple rituals gave me the feeling that everything was in order, that the world was predictable and safe. In the midst of this calm, the court, with its cold corridors and formalities, represented the routine of a man who found himself comfortable in his safety zone, even if sometimes monotony invaded my thoughts. There were no big dreams, no desire to break away from normality. Life was like a book already written with pages that passed without any major surprises. I found satisfaction in what I did, and in the company of Marla, who always believed that small gestures were the true engines of existence. There was a peace, albeit simple, that allowed me to face everyday challenges without major doubts or fears. Thus, amid the familiarity of faces and the certainty of daily commitments, I would never have imagined that a single sharp pain, on a seemingly ordinary day, could tear the veil of this peaceful reality and reveal a universe of unimaginable possibilities. I was resting at home when a sharp and unexpected pain took over my left side, as if an invisible blade was cutting through my body. At first, I thought it was a recurring kidney stone, something I had dealt with before. However, the intensity of the pain surpassed anything I had ever experienced, making me sigh and feel the area with trembling hands. Marla, who was in the next room, ran over to me, her eyes full of concern, and said, in a firm voice full of affection, "Callan, you need to go to the hospital right now." Without much alternative, but with a feeling of urgency that I couldn't explain, I left everything aside, and we rushed to the emergency room. Along the way, the tension was palpable. I tried to calm the pain with deep breaths, but the feeling was that something much more serious was happening. Upon arrival, the rush of medical professionals and the sterile environment of the hospital enveloped me in an atmosphere of controlled despair. Soon after the tests, confirmation of the kidney stone became evident, and the decision was made. A simple surgery was necessary. Uncertainty hung in the air as I prepared for the intervention. I, with a mixture of fear and resignation, held Marla's hand, who whispered words of courage and love, trying to dispel the shadow that was forming over us. "You're going to be okay, Callan. Just trust," she said, with a conviction that, at that moment, was my only foundation. Little did I know that amidst this routine of care and emergencies, something even more terrifying lurked on the horizon. As the medical team prepared to operate, an indescribable restlessness settled inside me, foreshadowing that this surgery would be the beginning of a journey that would forever change the course of my existence. Marla's voice echoed in my ears, mixing the sound of equipment and the murmur of doctors as the pain intensified and the world around me began to seem distant and surreal. I clearly remember the moment the line between life and death became too thin to ignore. After the surgery, the signs that something was wrong started to get worse. The fever rose, and my body, which until then had fought bravely, began to betray its vital signs. The medical team gathered with palpable urgency, and the environment, previously filled with expectations of a simple recovery, transformed into a scene of tension and concern. Amidst the confusion, Dr. Elijah Monroe, his voice full of gravity, announced firmly, "Mr. Huxley, we are experiencing septic shock. Your body is not responding as we expected." Words that seemed to resonate in a distant echo, while I, still sedated, did not fully understand the dimension of what was to come. Marla, her eyes welling with tears, held my hand, whispering between jolts, "Callan, please fight. You need to come back to us." Time seemed to slow down in that cold hospital corridor. Every beat I could feel in my consciousness turned into a cruel reminder that life was slipping away. The pressure of the equipment and the frantic monitoring of the machines created an almost hypnotic rhythm, which was confused with the sound of the medical team's hurried footsteps. It was then that at 3:15 p.m. the inevitable happened. My heart stopped beating, and deadly silence took over the environment. Dr. Monroe's voice, now tinged with a more solemn tone, echoed again. Clinical death confirmed. For Marla, the news was like a devastating blow, but amid the collective despair there was an unsettling silence that seemed to herald something unusual. Even as the doctor struggled to revive what was left of me, I was already feeling a sense of detachment. There was, at that exact moment, an invisible barrier that was forming, separating my consciousness from my body, as if I were on the edge of a precipice between two worlds. As the medical team struggled to revive my body, something inexplicable happened to me. In an instant that seemed to stretch on for an eternity, I felt as if my consciousness began to detach, floating gently above the chaotic scene. I looked down and saw my own body, still and pale as the rushing sounds of doctors and machine alarms faded into a distant murmur. There was no fear or anguish. On the contrary, an overwhelming feeling of peace came over me, as if all pain and worries had dissolved into thin air. "Callan, can you hear me?" Marla's voice seemed to echo from the end of a tunnel of light. I couldn't respond, but his despair mixed with the serenity I felt. Her face, marked by pain and hope, became blurred in the distance, as I moved further and further away from that body that no longer belonged to me. It was as if an invisible force led me to a new space, where the boundaries between life and death dissolved. Little by little, the sensation of floating intensified, and the operating room environment transformed into something ethereal, where soft colors and harmonious sounds intertwined. I could clearly see details that had previously gone unnoticed, the twinkling glows of the hospital lights and the contrast of the shadows that gently danced around them. Even though I was so far away, I still felt Marla's tender touch holding my hand, and her "Callan, fight please" seemed to merge with the silent melody of this new world. As I moved further away from physical form, the contours of the hospital dissolved and a feeling of freedom invaded every inch of my being. There were no barriers, no limitations, just the immensity of a space where time seemed to not exist. That moment, paradoxically, brought me both comfort and the promise of something greater. Amidst the tranquility, I realized that, despite having left behind the body I once knew, a new journey was just beginning. A journey that would lead me to understand the true meanings of love and existence. As I approached that golden light, I felt a subtle, comforting shift in every fiber of my being. As I crossed it, I was immediately enveloped by an aura of peace and a gentle sound, as if the entire universe was singing a melody that resonated directly in my soul. It was not a conventional song, but rather a deep harmony that seemed to carry, with it all, the love and compassion of the cosmos. Each note seemed designed to undo the shackles of fear and doubt, making room for an inner clarity I had never experienced. Upon emerging from this sea of light, I found myself in front of landscapes that defy the imagination. These were not scenes from a traditional paradise. They were visions of a world where everything pulsed with life and meaning. The trees, as if they were conscious beings, whispered ancient secrets, and the rivers sparkled with colors that varied according to the rhythm of the wind. Amid this enchanting scenery, I felt as if each element, each color, each sound, was telling me the story of existence in a way that no words could translate. In this new space, I realized that I was being guided by a presence that emanated a comforting warmth and unparalleled wisdom. Although there was no audible voice, the message was clear: you are home. It was as if the universe itself wanted to welcome me, showing that the true meaning of life lies in the union of everything we are. In the midst of this luminous embrace, I felt light and at the same time intensely connected to something greater than myself. As I took in every detail of that indescribable place, a part of me began to understand that this light was not just a visual phenomenon, but a symbol of healing. It illuminated not only the space around me, but also the darkest, most forgotten areas of my soul. The sensation was that every wound, every fear was being gently bathed in a warmth that brought forgiveness and renewal. At that moment, a deep peace came over me, and all the uncertainties of the physical world seemed to dissipate in the immensity of that welcoming light. As I remained immersed in the serenity of that space, a figure began to materialize before me, radiating a light that seemed to come from a place beyond understanding. His form was at once ethereal and palpable, and as I addressed him, I felt all barriers between the known and the inexplicable dissolve. He wore no clothing or symbols that I could associate with traditional images. Instead, it emanated a warm, comforting glow that penetrated deep into my soul. His voice came as a soft whisper but as clear as a divine call. "Callan, you are ready to see beyond the veil. What you have experienced is just the beginning of the truth that has always been within you." I tried to respond, but the words slipped out, replaced by a pure feeling of acceptance. With a gentle gesture, he extended his hand, and as he touched my consciousness, I felt a wave of warmth and understanding that swept away all my doubts. I understand," I managed to mutter, even though the words seemed inadequate for the magnitude of the moment. At the same time, images of my life, both the moments of joy and the shadows of pain, emerged in a swirl of light, forming a tapestry that showed how each experience was part of a greater whole, woven together by universal love. He continued, his words intertwining with the symphony of that transcendent environment. "Fear not, Callan. Your path transcends the rules of this world. You have been touched by the love that unites all things. The truth I revealed to you is not a judgment, but an invitation to freedom and compassion." Those words, spoken with a certainty that echoed in the depths of my being, were the antidote to years of silent doubts. I felt tears of gratitude flow, as if each drop took away a little of the bonds that I didn't know I carried. At that moment, I realized that being loved without conditions, being accepted in its entirety, was the essence that was missing in my existence. This meeting was not just a moment, it was the inauguration of a new internal era, where unconditional love and spiritual truth intertwined, transforming me irrevocably. The comforting energy of that heavenly environment began to counteract a feeling of inner restlessness. As I absorbed every detail of what seemed to be the entirety of the universe, a voice, this time firmer, penetrated the serene silence that surrounded me. It was not the soft whisper I had heard before, but a vibrant call that resonated in every cell of my being. "Callan, it's time to return," said that voice, clear and determined, reverberating through the ethereal space where I found myself. I felt a mixture of reluctance and understanding. At the same time that I wanted to remain in that state of peace and light, I realized that my journey still had a purpose on Earth. In a moment of deep introspection, the entity continued, explaining that the mission that awaited me was not to preach doctrines or impose beliefs, but to live the truth that I had just discovered. "You are to be a beacon of love, of compassion, and of authenticity. Your experience here was not just to enlighten yourself, but to touch those who still live in the darkness of fear and doubt." As the voice conveyed this message, images of my life were intertwined with visions of the future. I saw my wife, Marla, with her eyes full of hope and silent tears, and young people who needed an example of resilience and unconditional love. Amid this torrent of feelings, I realized that my transformation was not just personal, but destined to impact an entire community. "Do not fear the return, Callan," echoed the voice again, now accompanied by a glow that seemed to symbolize the beginning of a new cycle. "Every step you take from this moment on will be guided by this light that you carried within your being. Share it without reservation, and love will multiply." In the midst of this silent dialogue, I felt a deep calm, as if all doubts were dispelled by the certainty of a greater destiny. The call was clear: to return to the world of the living and be a tangible example of universal truth, an emissary of love that transcends any barrier. Waking up again was a feeling of rebirth, a painful, and at the same time miraculous return to reality. I felt the weight of my body slowly return, each muscle claiming the presence of a being that, for a few minutes, seemed to have dissolved into infinity. He was surrounded by astonished faces and breathless voices. The equipment pulsed with life, setting a beat that now mixed with the sound of murmurs of astonishment and relief. Dr. Elijah Monroe, his eyes fixed on me, murmured, "You're back, Mr. Huxley," as Marla held my hand tightly, tears of joy and relief streaming silently down her face. The moment I opened my eyes, I felt like I was no longer the same. The physical pain was sharp, but it carried a new depth, as if each throb reminded me of the mission I had been given. Awakening brought not only the light of the operating room, but an internal light that guided me. As the doctors marveled at what they considered a miracle, I knew I had crossed a threshold that could never be undone. In the midst of this whirlwind of emotions, Marla whispered, "I always knew you would come back, that this experience would transform you." His words, full of faith and love, resonated with the certainty that the reunion between our world and my new self was just the beginning of something great. I walked, staggering, but with the determination of a man who had seen beyond the veil of existence, realizing that every gesture, every look, every word carried the potential to spread the truth he had received. As the doctors recorded data and celebrated the miraculous recovery, I felt an inner flame growing, a calling to be living proof that death was not the end, but a portal to a life of unconditional love and compassion. My recovery would be long, but what really mattered was the clarity with which I now saw every human being, every situation, as an opportunity to demonstrate the transformative power of love. At the end of this journey, with my heart filled with a truth that transcends human understanding, I felt the urgency to share everything I experienced. I felt that every second of that passage through another realm, every glimpse of the wonders and challenges of the beyond, carried a message that needed to echo on Earth. During the days that followed my return, as the physical scar healed and the new inner light grew stronger, I began to dedicate myself intensely to demonstrating this love that had been revealed to me. In silent conversations, in simple gestures and sincere looks, he sought to convey that life is not limited to mere existence, but to a deep encounter with the essence of being, where each action is an opportunity to connect with the divine. Marla, with her unconditional support, encouraged me to dialogue with those who were still lost in fear and routine, showing that true spirituality is not found in empty rituals or immutable dogmas, but in the ability to love without conditions, to forgive without reservations, and to live each moment with full awareness. In a meeting with a group of young people visiting the court, I said, "You are light. No matter how many shadows life throws at you, there will always be an illuminated path if you allow love to guide your choices." This message, simple and direct, was a reflection of the transformation I experienced. It was living proof that death was not the end, but the beginning of a new way of existing where each soul is invited to awaken to unity with the universe. Today, as I look at the horizon and see the smiles of those who somehow found strength in my story, I feel that I have fulfilled the mission entrusted to me. The greatest truth I carry with me is that universal love, the one that transcends time and space, is the only force capable of healing humanity's wounds. Every gesture of compassion, every word of encouragement, every sincere look is a seed of light planted in this vast field of existence, waiting to blossom into hope and renewal. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.